Okay. You mentioned debanking. And in my experience, there's two kinds of people who we know and in the country at large. People who know exactly what you mean by that, and people who have no idea. So give an example or just explain it more vividly. And it's to people who don't know about it, when I've tried to explain to them, they're incredulous. They
Yeah.
say JP Morgan Chase is going to tell some successful business person they can't bank at JP Morgan Chase. Like, why would they turn down their business?
Yeah.
So explain to people, because I'm sure the people on here, they may not even know the term. Explain just how, not just how bad it is for someone who happens to, but how insidious it is for what it says about the wider society, Mr. de Tocqueville.
Yes. So as you know, banking is not an unregulated industry. It's tightly regulated by the government and by the government bureaucracies. There's at least 8 federal agencies that regulate the banks. And by the way, if you're a bank CEO, you complain about this endlessly because like who can figure out even what to do when you've got 8 regulators, but there's 8 regulators that regulate the banks. In the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, there was legislation, passed called Dodd-Frank that greatly increased the level of regulation and intertwine what I would describe as sort of intertwining of the government and the banks. By the way, part of that is that new bank creation in the U.S. went to zero after Dodd-Frank, and so you no longer have new entrants in the banking system, and then banks fail and consolidate all the time, and so the number of banks in the country is shrinking rapidly. And then you've got this concept of the too big to fail banks. The technical term is called the GSIBs, the sort of I think it's globally significant something, but banks, but they're under like very special kinds of regulation. And so they're very intertwined with the government and with the government bureaucracy and with the officials in the Treasury Department and all these other agencies. That gives the government potentially a great deal of power to use the banks as an extension of its own power, of state power. And we first saw this debanking phenomenon actually start 15 years ago under Obama with a operation, something that was literally called Operation Choke Point at the time, which was I think led by the Treasury Department at the time, which was to use the banking system to essentially, I would say, influence or coerce economic activity that may not be technically illegal, but which is unwanted in the American economy. And it actually started with medical marijuana. Right. And so it was like, okay, these states are legalizing pot, but like we don't want pot to exist as a thing. So we're going to debank all the medical marijuana dispensaries, force them to operate in cash. It then extended to prostitution, right? Which sounds like it's a good idea to like not have prostitution be something that ran through the banks. Of course, the problem is you're then forcing prostitutes to operate entirely in cash, which has other consequences. It then went to gun dealers, right? And so people in the government who did not, let's say, were not enthusiastically pro Second Amendment, started to advocate for and implement the debanking of gun dealers. And so it basically started to run. And there was a scandal about this in Washington in the, I don't know, 13, 14, 15 period where people kind of figured it out and there was kind of a blow up and some of that stopped. And then basically that program reactivated under what we call Operation Choke Point 2.0, which was the same thing. And it reactivated hard basically after started in Trump's term in some of the bureaucracies, but it really, came in hard in the Biden-Harris administration. And it became extremely focused specifically on crypto. And so for the last 5 years, anybody who's associated with crypto, anybody who has crypto in their job title, anybody who runs a crypto company is just like their odds of being able to get a bank account are very low. It also applies to companies. And so we have on the order of 30 companies that got debanked, right? And debanked means you don't get a bank account, right? Right.
When you say we've got 30 companies, do you mean 30 companies you invest in?
Yeah, 30 portfolio companies at our
Yeah.
venture firm. And so I'll just give you the experience of what it means to be debanked. So what it means to be debanked is you get a letter from your bank saying, we now decline to be your bank. You have to close your account by the end of the month. You then ask them why you're being debanked, and they respond, we can't tell you. There is a law called the Bank Secrecy Act that prevents us from telling you. Good day, sir. Right. And then what
And
happens is
is it like Willy Wonka where they say, I said good day?
yes,
Just walk out.
do not let the door hit you on the butt
Let me
on
just
your
let me
way out.
just stop let me
Yeah.
just stop you on that portion. So these are companies with a fair number of assets, right? These are not
Mhm.
people with $1,000 checking accounts. They have relationships with their private bankers in these large banks. Their
Yeah.
lawyers sometimes are dealing with stuff. Just on an interpersonal basis, it just seems strange. Say you must close your account. Like did people your portfolio companies, did they appeal? Did you call Jamie Dimon and say, Jamie, stop debanking us?
Yes. Oh, yes. We had this conversation many times,
Yeah.
including
And
with
wh- and what
CEOs.
and what did the CEOs say? My hands are tied. The government's making me.
They said under the Bank Secrecy Act, we can't tell you why we're doing what we're doing.
And did anybody go to court over it?
There have been challenges, but you're in this zone. There have been challenges, but you're in this zone where in theory, what you're dealing with is a private actor, right? And so there's no law that says that a bank has to take a client,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And this is not like a case of racial discrimination, so like civil rights law doesn't apply. And
yeah.
so the bank is acting as a private entity, except of course is the bank acting as a private entity because what you know is happening, right? But you can't necessarily prove is that it's
So
pressure from the government.
so they say you must close down your account. So you take your money and then you start dialing around and you start going down to banks you've never heard of, right?
Yes. And you find out that you can't get accounts at those banks either. Right. And so and then you're in real trouble. And by the way, debanking is kind of the shorthand, but it's like bank accounts and then its ability to like transact credit card transactions. You can get kicked out of the credit. There's an analogous thing that happens in the credit card system. There's credit card blacklists where you get kicked out. You can't have a business that processes credit cards or debit cards. There's also you can get blocked out of being able to get home insurance. You can get blocked out of being able to get car insurance. You can get blocked out of being able to get mortgages. And so so what it is it's the domestic equivalent of the foreign sanctions regime that we use on hostile regimes like Iran and North Korea. Except it's not a formal action by the U.S. government. It's an implicit activity that's happening through some combination of federal pressure and bank voluntary choice, deliberately obscured behind the cloak of this Bank Secrecy Act. Let me just continue those.
Yeah,
Who's
yeah,
getting
yeah.
debanked?
Please do, please do.
It's the crypto companies. It's what we call the fintech companies. So it's the financial services startups that are not themselves crypto companies, but they are they want to offer new kinds of financial services, and so there's a similar kind of pressure there. And then there's something like extremely dangerous and damaging, which is, of course, political debanking. And this has become a hot topic, recently because you probably saw, the president was on this video thing with
Yeah.
into Davos, and the CEO of
Yep.
Bank of America, and Trump said on the call, he said, by the way, you're debanking conservatives. You need to stop doing that. The Bank of America put out a statement saying we would never debank a conservative. I've heard the same thing from other bank CEOs. If you talk to people who were in the first Trump administration, a very common story that you hear is that the officials from the first Trump administration got debanked after 2021. They just got like flat
Correct.
out like blitzed
Correct.
out. A number of them actually ended up at a very small bank where they all hope that nobody points out who the bank is because it's like the last bank in America that they can get banked at.
Yep.
And then the kicker to the whole thing was, I'll just give you the two kickers we discovered in the last few weeks. So one is Melania Trump published her book, and she doesn't talk in public much. But she says in the book that she and Barron both got debanked after Trump left office, right? And so like I guess it's possible that like Melania and 16-year-old Barron were like involved in some global crime conspiracy. I don't think that's actually the case. I think they were just happened to be family members. And then the other thing that just came out this week that actually shocked me, which is there's a guy named Roloff Botha. Who is the head of one of the top Silicon Valley venture capital firms, one of our peer firms called Sequoia. And this guy is a pillar of the American, he's a great immigrant success story, incredibly successful entrepreneur, and then head of Sequoia, incredibly successful guy, blue chip in every possible respect. And he just gave an interview like literally 3 days ago where he said, oh, by the way, he said he got debanked in 2019 for reasons that were never explained to him, by the way,
Yeah.
by Bank of America.
Yeah.
And so this thing has been ripping for years. There's like, and this accompanies this like intense assault by these same government agencies trying to, come after these industries like crypto and fintech. And so obviously what's happening here is an intertwining of state power and private entities, like it's illegal for the government. It's illegal for the government. It's unconstitutional for the government to take something that it itself cannot do and then to, coerce or require or strong arm a private entity into doing that thing. And of course, that's exactly what's been happening here. So the bureaucracies in the government built a financial Death Star to be aimed at their domestic enemies, and it ran unchallenged basically until this handover. And then maybe where we are today is both the House and the Senate, with the turnover of everything. There are hearings coming up where this is going to be fully kind of undressed in Congress.
Yeah.
And so we'll see what happens.
People get debanked who are indicted, never convicted, but just indicted. That happens to individuals. What happened to your 30 portfolio companies that were debanked? Did they wilt? Did any of them go out of business because they were debanked?
Oh yeah. Some of them die. Some of them just can't operate, right? So they're just done, and the founders, close it down and go do something else. Some of them pivot, as we say, which is, they change their business plan to try to come up with something that will evade the Death Star. some of them go figure out some plan B. They figure out a way to operate internationally, for example. So they could have some international bank that does it. Others, figure out some maneuver.
Right.
There were small, part of what happened during the SVB crisis. For a while, there were some sort of banks that were refusing basically the pressure from the government, and with names like Silvergate and I forget the name of the other
Mhm.
one, but so they were banking these companies, and then those banks went down during the when Silicon Valley Bank went down, and there's like
Right.
at least lots of smoke that those banks got targeted
Right.
by the feds because they weren't
Yeah.
cooperating with the
Yeah.
debanking regime. So
So this story is interesting. It's important, and it represents, as you've suggested correctly, a huge abuse of government power. Do you remember reading a lot of stories about this in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal?
no,
No, because if they were debanking liberals, there would be. It's an extraordinary, great story, and again, it's just not covered because it doesn't fit with their view of the world. It's a really a big problem, and thank you for explaining. And you, as you point out, the president brought it up at Davos, but you've been bringing it up in all your interviews, and I really appreciate it because you're speaking truth to power, and maybe the Wall Street Journal will hear this and write a story. All right,